It's truly an honor to have the opportunity to introduce our invited guests today. First of all, though, I want to thank all of you for coming out. This is great. We're really pleased that Delano Lewis could be with us. We've been planning this for some time. We've been so excited about it, and we are just delighted that he's here. Delano and I go way back. And so our families, his wife, and we've known each other for years, his wife's parents, we just have a long history together, and that makes it really special for him to be with us today. He's a native Kansan. He's a Jayhawker, like me. We both are Jayhawkers from the University of Kansas. His law degree is from Washburn University. He has an amazing career. He started out working for the federal government. For about a decade, he served in a number of different capacities, including attorney with the Department of Justice, attorney in the Office of Compliance in the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He was associate director of the Peace Corps in Nigeria. And when he was in the Peace Corps, he and his wife took 3 of their sons, and the 4th was born while over there. He also was the country director of the U.S. Peace Corps in Uganda. He was legislative assistant to U.S. Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts. He was chief of staff for Delegate Walter Fauntroy of the District of Columbia. But that's just the beginning. He then served in Washington, D.C. as executive of C&P Telephone Company, which is a subsidiary of AT&T. He was officer of Bell Atlantic, now Verizon. He retired from there as president and CEO of the District of Columbia operations. That wasn't enough. He's done more. How many of you listen to NPR? He was the president of NPR Radio. Can you believe that? But then he got a call one day from the White House. And he was asked if he would consider being ambassador to the Republic of South Africa. He asked his wife, "What do you think?" That'd be okay. He was confirmed in 1999, and he had the opportunity and was sharing with us last night the experiences he had with President Clinton, Al Gore. He knows them all. It's amazing. He was ambassador there in South Africa, and he will talk with you more about those amazing experiences. But he's done more. He also has been in an academic setting as well. He assumed the position of senior fellow at New Mexico State University, where he established there the Institute for International Relations. He served as director of the Institute and also interim dean of international and border programs at New Mexico State University. As you can imagine, he has been the recipient of numerous awards and honorary degrees. He was selected as Washingtonian of the Year in 1978. He received a Distinguished Alumni Citation from his alma mater, the University of Kansas. He's received honorary degrees from Barry University, Bowie State University, Washburn University, where he finished law school, George Washington University, Kent State University, Nova Southeastern University, Southern Illinois University, and Lafayette College. Can you believe that? Amazing. He has done so many things over the years and still is active. Currently, he's on the board of Colgate-Palmolive Company, Eastman Kodak Company, and the American Institutes for Research. Now, he's been pretty busy, right? But in addition to that, he's a family man. He and his wife, Gail, is a very good friend of mine. They have 4 sons, all amazing young men. Some of you who have children Have to do this, Delano. Some of you who have children know about a program that his youngest son has starred in on the Disney Channel. His youngest son is Mr. Mosby, the sweet life of Zach and Cody. Yes, that's his son, Phil Lewis. Just an amazing person, businessman, attorney, leader, ambassador, family man, and friend. Please join me in welcoming Delano Lewis.
Thank you so very much. Ruth Gale. I know she goes by Ruth, but I know her as Ruth Gale. Thank you for that beautiful, wonderful introduction. I can't remember all those things that, it's been a while. I guess when you read that, you might say I have a hard time keeping a job. Another thing you might say is that my father would be very proud, and my mother would believe every word of what you said. But I am just honored to be here with this distinguished group. I had some prepared remarks, but when I think about this group, and I think about Ruth Gale, we've been working on my coming here for over a year. I am a great fan of hers. She is also an amazing person. We had dinner last night with the dean and distinguished people, Ellen Pender-Hughes and Elaine Pender-Hughes. We had dinner last night, and the dean's wife, Brigitte. Wonderful introduction to Boston College and a wonderful introduction to the Graduate School of Social Work. But you're lucky to have Ruth Gale McRoy, because I've been following her career since she was quite young. Our families go back to Prairie View, Texas. My father-in-law and her father were the best of friends. Her father, Horace Murdoch, was the accountant and the financial man, and my father-in-law was the administrator and the educator, Herman T. Jones. In fact, if you go to Prairie View now, there's a middle school named after my father-in-law, Herman T. Jones. But they were great friends. They started in Topeka together, Kansas City together, and Prairie View. So I got to know Ruth Gale, her father, Horace, her mother, and her brother, and we've been family friends all these years. But she's an amazing person in what she does in social work, an expert called on many areas, particularly orphans and adoptions, a real scholar, a research and academic. So I want a round of applause to my good friend, Ruth. My remarks here, this is sort of like a South African reunion is what it is. So many people that I met coming in are involved with South Africa, are planned to go to South Africa. It's an absolutely wonderful place. But I also feel at home on a number of occasions. My background, you heard a little bit about it. I really had forgotten some of those things that she brought back, some of those great fond memories. But most of my career was in Washington, D.C., 35 years. I did serve on the board of Catholic University of America. And I said that was the only board that when I went to a meeting, I genuflect. There were cardinals, there were bishops. It was an unbelievable experience in Washington, be on Catholic's board. My oldest son, Dell, had Boston College on his list because he had gone to Gonzaga High School in Washington, D.C., run by the Jesuits. And we've always been close to the Jesuits, but he chose to go to the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point instead. But we have the Catholic connection. I converted to Catholicism when I married, and Gail and I have been married 52 years. It'll be 52 years in June. I don't want to rush it, but 52 years in June. And we have 4 sons, as you heard, and we have 11 grandchildren. And so that's really the blessing. All those things you heard are important, and I treasure them, but the treasure are those sons, the daughters-in-law, and the 11 grands. There are 6 boys and 5 girls. Unfortunately, the boys are still ahead, but I don't have any control over that. But I'm going to share some things with you. I'm honored to be here. I want to thank the dean for accepting that, allowing Ruth to extend that invitation. And to him, I think you're lucky that he is doing what he's doing for this institution, and that's establishing a global practice program. I've been reading about it. I was impressed by talking with him about it, that the Graduate School of Social Work through that program has students and scholars and researchers all over the world. And you should be commended, because many people have not understood this connection between academia and the world. So I want to say thanks to the Dean for having me here. And thanks to my good friend Ruth again for this invitation. And to all you distinguished guests, you know, many of you are partners in social work and working with Boston College. I want to say thank you for the work you do. And ladies and gentlemen, some of you I have not had a chance to meet, and I hope we'll have a chance to share some things. But this kind introduction to Boston College is exciting for me, and I want to share a few words with you today. But before I begin, I want to apologize for my wife, Gail, who's not here. As I said, we shared many, many experiences together. But I'm reminded she's a powerful woman. We have shared a lot, these 4 boys and 11 grandchildren, these experiences in this country and around the world. But she's a very powerful woman in her own right. And I'm reminded of the story I once heard about Mayor David Dinkins of New York. And they were traveling in the limo in New York City, and they passed a construction site, and there was a ditch digger on this construction site, and David Dinkins, the mayor, was kind of chuckling. So his wife said to him, "What's so funny?" He said, "That's your old boyfriend digging ditches there on the construction site." And she said, "Well, what's funny?" He says, "Well, you know, if you'd married him, you'd be the wife of a ditch digger." And she said, "Oh, no, honey. If I had married him, he'd be mayor of New York." And that's how I can tell you about Gail, because she is the power in the family, without question. I was asked to come up with a title, and as I thought about the title, I've changed my mind many, many times. Caring for people is a global responsibility. If there was a subtitle, it would be Caring for People is Everybody's Responsibility. There are issues impacting the developing world and the developed world. One of those issues is HIV and AIDS. There are 14 million people in the world with HIV and AIDS. Over 22 million people live, thank you, in Africa. The disease is the leading cause of death in sub-Saharan Africa, with approximately 1,600 people dying every day from HIV and AIDS. In South Africa, 5.6 million people are living with HIV and AIDS. There are an estimated 360,000 people under 15 living with HIV and AIDS. And it's estimated that 1.9 million AIDS-related orphans are in South Africa, many with both parents deceased. HIV and AIDS is responsible for 1/4 of the country's orphans. Can you imagine? This disease has impacted the educational system of children, the impacts on the social fabric of life, and splitting up families that are being torn apart. To a shift to another global issue, the issue of hunger and poverty, with a world population approaching 7 billion people. 98% of the world undernourished people live in developing countries. 98%. 2/3 of the world's hungry are in just 7 countries: Bangladesh, China, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, India, Pakistan, and Indonesia. Where is hunger the worst? This may surprise you. Asia and the Pacific, 578 million people. Sub-Saharan Africa, 239 million people. Latin America and the Caribbean, 53 million. Near East and North Africa, 37 million, and the most horrifying, 19 million in developed countries. So people are hungry in the developed world. And 60% of the world hunger, or the world people are hungry, are women. And 1/3 of childhood deaths in sub-Saharan Africa, 1/3 are caused by hunger. Let's shift a little closer to home. I have been very concerned about the criminal justice system since I was very young. I graduated from Sumner High School in 1956, all-black school in Kansas City, Kansas. And if you go to my resume in the yearbook, if you could find me, I don't look the same, but if you find that picture, it talked about my activities. It talked about band, music, honor society, drum major, international relations, and it had ambition, lawyer. I was 17 when I graduated, and 7 years later, I became a lawyer. And my ambition was to deal with criminal justice and civil rights and to help poor people. That's what I had felt I wanted to do in life, but my career took different changes. But I was always concerned about the criminal justice system. I don't know if you know that more blacks and Latinos are in jails than in college dorms. The census data in 2006 showed more than 3 times as many black people were in prisons as in college dorms. And from 1980 to 2008, the number of people incarcerated in America quadrupled from 500,000 to 2.3 million people. The US is 5% of the world's population, but has 25% of the world's prisoners. African Americans now constitute 1 million of the total 2.3 million of those incarcerated. Unbelievable figure. African Americans are incarcerated nearly 6 times the rate of whites. Together, African Americans and Hispanics comprise 58% of all prisoners in 2008, even though together they only consume about 1/4 of the total population. Jury sentences have disparities as well. 5 times as many whites use drugs as compared to African Americans. However, yet African Americans are sent to prison for drug offenses at 10 times the rates of whites. But finally, the cost of incarceration. $70 billion is spent on correction facilities. Prisons and jails are a growing portion of our public safety budget, is reaching $200 billion. So maybe if we stop building prisons, we might balance our budgets. But our last snapshot of American society is in the area of unemployment. Our unemployment rate is around 8.5% generally, but it's a significant impact on African Americans and Hispanics. And I remember when I was in South Africa, the unemployment rate among South Africans was up 15 to 20%, and in some places, close to 50% of unemployment. Among blacks in America, the jobless rate is 15%, while unemployment among Hispanics is around 12%. Joblessness among white workers are below 9%. But minorities make up a larger portion of the low-wage workforce and tend to have less seniority and probably the first fired when the economy begins to go south. But I shared those statistics with you about these issues of discrimination, unemployment, joblessness, disease, and poverty, because these are global issues and domestic issues. But they're also human issues. But I think there is some common solutions. And some of the common solutions, I think, in my judgment, come in 3 areas. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because you know this. Those 3 areas, I think, the first would be a strong family unit is necessary to turn those numbers around. The second is education and skill building. And the third is jobs or productivity in our society. I was asked some time ago, if you had a magic wand in the U.S. to solve some of the U.S.'s problems, and I mentioned a few of them, what would you do? And my answer is, I'd give the person a job. And you know why? Because if you have a job in this capitalistic society, you are productive. If you visit our jails and our prisons, and if you see those young black men and Hispanic men, and mostly of them are men, they have low education, they have low job skills, and they're not productive. And that tends to lead to crime. You know that. You deal with that in social work. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But I've been fortunate in my life to have those elements in abundance and then some. I had a very strong family unit. I'm an only child. I was born in Kansas. My wife tells this story, Ruth Gale, that we both were born, bred, wed, and fled from Kansas. But don't repeat that. But I'm a native Kansan. My mother was a domestic. She worked in the homes of white people in the community. My father was a railroad porter. He worked on the Santa Fe Railroad with 11th grade education, worked on the Santa Fe Railroad for 37 years. That was a very, very good job. And they believed in education. There was no doubt it was not where I was going to school. No, it was not where if I was going to college, it was where I was going to school. My mother instilled in me a sense of confidence. She used to tell me I could do anything in this world except sing. And I want to tell you today, as a result of that, I have a hard time singing because my mother told me I couldn't. But someone asked a person who achieved great heights, how did you do it? And he said, no one ever told me I couldn't. So I had a strong family unit. My mother and I were very close because my father was a railroader. I can remember going down to the segregated lunch counter in Kansas City, Kansas. And I said, Mom, why are we doing this? Because we're sitting in a separate counter for colored. She said, I want to teach you how to use a fork and a knife. I want to teach you how to live and eat and work and to eat out. She told me about good books because she read. We traveled because I was on a pass and we went to California and points west from Kansas. We learned about good music because she loved music. So I had a strong family unit which gave me the foundation to achieve. Secondly, education was extremely important. There was no doubt that I could climb out of that segregated community if I went on for higher education. And the whole point was to learn something to be productive in society. And so there was no doubt that when I graduated, I was going to become that lawyer. And I lived in an all-black community. And one of the great things about the all-black school, I must tell you about, I'm going to visit that community this weekend. I'm giving a speech to the 153rd anniversary of the first African Methodist Episcopal Church, First AME. I'm giving a speech there on the service on Sunday. But this church was in my neighborhood. And one of the things about the neighborhood was we had support. Those black teachers couldn't find jobs in other parts of the United States. They had masters working on their PhDs, and they taught us at Sumner High School. We had a solid education. My high school principal lived across the street. That was good and that was bad. When I came in late at night, he would be walking his dog. Not too good. But when I went off to the University of Kansas, I remember that my band teacher was a graduate of the University of Kansas, and he pledged to Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. My science teacher was a graduate of the University of Kansas. My principal was a graduate of the University of Kansas. All of those men were my models and role models when I was in high school. There was no doubt that I was going to the University of Kansas. There was no doubt I was going to be a member of the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, and I did those. Strong education, a belief that out of education comes skills development and productivity. And I began my climb to find work and a career. I went on to Washburn Law School in Topeka, Kansas, and I worked at the Menninger Clinic as a child care worker for 3.5 years. I went to law school full-time and worked full-time. So those of you students in the audience today say, you can't do it, it can be done. I worked 40 hours a week and went to law school full-time and graduated in 3 years. As a child care worker at Menninger's, I worked with the social workers, I worked with the school teacher, I worked with the psychiatrist in dealing with the mental illness of middle-sized boys from the ages of 8 to 14. So I had a chance in those years to learn about mental health. A great experience for a young law student and for any individual. So I graduated from law school and got my first job as a lawyer with the Department of Justice. And I only tell you one story because it symbolizes my career. I didn't do those things alone. I did those things with the help of mentors and role models and people who gave me support. The reason I got that job in the Department of Justice was so fascinating. My next-door neighbor at Washburn Law School was a couple, and she was putting her husband through undergrad, and she was a legal secretary, and she was also helping her husband when he graduated through medical school. He transferred from Washburn to KU Medical School, so they moved to Kansas City. So she moved from the United States Attorney's Office in Topeka to the United States Attorney's Office in Kansas City. So she worked for the United States Attorney as a legal secretary. She sent me a letter. We didn't have the smartphones. She sent me a letter, no email, and said that I should apply for the honors program for the Department of Justice. I wrote Sue back. I said, Sue, you know I've been going to law school full time. I'm doing okay, but I'm not an honors student. She said, apply anyway. I went up to interview with Mr. Newell George, who was the United States Attorney. He stood about 6'5" or so. I went in. He said, come here, let me show you around. He was a Kennedy friend. He'd been a congressman from Kansas City. He lost his bid for re-election in 1960. This was in 1962. So he was a United States Attorney appointed by JFK. I want to show you pictures. He showed me pictures of JFK. He said, here's a picture of John F. Kennedy in a hat. Here's a picture of the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy. Wonderful. I just couldn't believe it. So the next thing I knew, I got a letter from Bobby Kennedy saying that, well, first I must say that Newell George wrote him a letter, the U.S. Attorney, to Bobby Kennedy, and he said to, dear Attorney General, I want you to meet this young man. He would have been an honor student if he hadn't worked 40 hours a week and supported his family. Well, Bobby Kennedy must have agreed with that, because several months later I was sworn in and became an attorney with the Department of Justice under Bobby Kennedy. But that was the beginning of the career, from justice to EEOC to the Peace Corps in Africa. We can talk about Nigeria, we can talk about Uganda. I was 28 years old running the Peace Corps program in Uganda. What did I know about running anything at age 28? But I had that opportunity to run a program of 160 volunteers. Absolutely incredible experience. I came back to Washington through a Peace Corps friend who was working in Senator Brooks' office, the senator of Massachusetts. At that time, Republican, I might add, he was the only black in the United States Senate at that time, and the first black since Reconstruction. Senator Edward Brooks is still alive, and I was his legislative assistant back in the early 70s. And I got that job because of a Peace Corps friend. When Walter Fauntroy was elected delegate, I went and applied, and I went to see the senator, and I said, Senator, I have this chance to become chief of staff for Walter Fauntroy. He looked at me, I worked for him for 2 years. He looked at me, he said, are you a Democrat? I said, yes, Senator, I work for you. You've never asked me that. He said, oh, he says, well, good. I think that's a good thing for you to work for Walter. So I became Walter Fauntroy's chief of staff. But I could go on, but my only point about telling you about the career is that those things that I talked to you about, a good education, strong underpinnings, a strong family unit, and being productive in life is what my life has all been about. From the Justice Department to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, to the Peace Corps, to 21 years in telecom. I had the unique experience of government service and business. I had no idea what made this country go, but after 21 years in business, I have a keen sense of economics and a keen sense of business. And I've been able to marry my understanding of government and my understanding of business into understanding what's great and what makes America the great country that it is. I also know a little bit about NGOs. I worked as president of National Public Radio for 4.5 years, a marvelous experience. I still listen today. It is still probably the best media organization in the country with very talented journalists. And I say about that experience, we had 600 stations. We're probably about 800 stations. I listened to WBUR this morning. I said they were a group of talented journalists who didn't want to be managed. But it was an incredible, incredible experience. And finally, which is not finally for me, but the ambassadorial assignment. I'll conclude by telling you it was probably one of the greatest experiences of my life. To be the representative of the United States government to any country is a high honor. But to be the United States representative to the Republic of South Africa is even greater. Here is a country that has gone through extreme challenges with a system of minority controlling a majority, a system of apartheid that is just unbelievable that you could not imagine, although if you're as old as I, you know about segregation in America. But they had that many times over in South Africa. But to see the miracle that has changed in South Africa is also unbelievable. A country that of 44 or 45 million people, very rich in natural resources, very rich with a strong infrastructure, but with extreme challenges. I mentioned HIV and AIDS being one of them. Extreme challenges of employment, housing, education, lots of other things, diseases, lots of other things. But tremendous promise. The way South Africa goes, in my judgment, is the way for all of sub-Saharan Africa. It is the model and is the beacon. But to be ambassador, and I don't know if you know that the American embassy in South Africa is, and I'm sure it is today, it was in 1999 when I was there, the second largest embassy on the continent. Some things may have changed. The first was Egypt, and the second was South Africa. We had 700 people in the embassy, 400 Americans, 300 South Africans. We had 3 consulates in Johannesburg and Durban and Cape Town. We have a strong presence in South Africa as a U.S. mission. So it was a wonderful job to represent the United States. To be an ambassador, you have to know the foreign policy of the United States. You represent the President of the United States. When I presented my credentials to Thabo Mbeki, the President, that credentials came from President Bill Clinton, and I showed it to my wife, and she didn't quite understand it. It said that as Ambassador of the United States, I take orders from only the President of the United States. Gail didn't quite understand that, but that's what my orders said. But ambassador takes orders through the Secretary of State to the President. You are the President's representative. You have to understand the foreign policy. You've got to be able to explain it. Your job is to explain the foreign policy and to also take what's from South Africa back to the U.S. You are really a messenger for the United States. President Mandela had just stepped down as president, and Thabo Mbeki, his deputy, succeeded him. For every ambassador that goes to a country, you have to get approval from the president of that country. In my case, I had to get approval of Thabo Mbeki, and I had to get the approval of Nelson Mandela. So once those approvals came, and I got approved by the United States Senate, we landed in South Africa in December 1999. I was a political appointee of President Bill Clinton, and when administrations change, all political appointees have to resign. So my tour was short. Tours are usually 3 years. The Republicans came into office, as you know, in 2000. So I only spent a year and a half, but it was a wonderful year and a half. So I'm going to close by saying to you that those things that I mentioned to you with the problems that we have in our society and in the world, that you have an opportunity, and many of you are doing that today, of making a difference. You have many choices to serve, whether it's Peace Corps, Foreign Service, business, education, relief services. You've got an opportunity to serve on so many levels to deal with these problems. And these problems are globally connected. We saw that in the financial crisis of 2008, and we're still seeing it today as we're recovering. That we're connected. And we're connected globally with communications, and information is instantaneous. There's no way you can be working in Brookline, Massachusetts and not be infected by what's happening, not only in Massachusetts and the United States, but around the world. So caring for people is a global responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility, and it's very fulfilling and rewarding. But my notice to you and advice to you is keep doing what you're doing, because the world needs your caring, whether it's at home or abroad. Don't let anyone say to you, why are you doing that overseas? Because we've got problems right here in Massachusetts. That's quite right. And I think all of us coming together can work on those problems, not only in Massachusetts, but around the world. We can do it at home and abroad. So thank you for having me, because I know that you are with me, because the payoff is a better world. A payoff is less hunger. A payoff is less conflict and hatred. And anything about South Africa and the model of Nelson Mandela, if you think about it, after serving 27 years in prison, and if you read his book, Long Walk to Freedom, you can't help but be moved. The fact that he worked with his exit, and when he got ready to go, and de Klerk says, we're ready, and Mandela says, I'm not ready yet. Could you imagine, after 27 years, he said, I'm not ready yet. And what he was doing was mapping and planning for when he walked out of that door. Because he wanted it to be no bloodshed. He wanted it to be peaceful. He says, we're not going to do to them what they did to us. It was a miracle, but it was the leadership of not only Nelson Mandela, but many others that fought that fight. And they just awarded some awards just recently to those who were involved in that fight. And Randall Robinson, African American, who founded Trans-Africa, was given an award just recently by President Zuma. But it was Nelson Mandela that had that model that we're going to do this in peace, and that model of dialogue, that model of respect, that model of treating people as we'd like to be treated. That's what saved South Africa, and those same principles could save us in many parts of this country and the world today. So it could be less violence, less hatred. It could be better universities and colleges. It could be more productivity on the part of people, better resolutions of our many problems. But above all, my view is, and my hope would be, a world of mutual respect and dialogue where every human life is respected. Thank you very much.
As I listened, my thought was I wish that you were giving a keynote, and that we could get together in groups and discuss a lot of the things that you've said. What troubles me after listening, what you've stirred up in me is a feeling of great disappointment in the leadership of the last half century. We've had time to see what was coming, and we've had time to plan it, and our response has been competition rather than cooperation. We have a country which is split between people who want to look backwards and others who want to look forward, and subsequently we can't move a step. Years ago, I was a faculty member on in the planning and community organization department here at the School of Social Work, and it was in the 1960s, and we sort of looked ahead to what could happen if we could think ahead. And I just don't see that in our politics. I don't see that in our economics. We look at China, and we're taking a combative stance. We're ready to compete with China. One of the things that you said made my response in my mind was, I don't care how good your seeds are if the field is dead. There are a lot of things that I would say about social work that is a disappointment in the last half century, because we didn't find a way to fertilize the field. And a lot of the seeds that we have planted really haven't been successful in their growth. And I don't think that we can go into this 21st century without looking at the whole concept of competition and the whole concept of the greed that pushes capitalism to do what it does. So as I said, I wish we could have had your keynote so we could have discussed this in groups and firmed up some of the seeds that you planted. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I heard your disappointment, but I don't want you to leave dispirited. I think your points are well taken. My answer to you is, I'm a firm believer in leadership, and I'm a firm believer of activism. And I can say, after spending some time in the academic community, there are many ways in which you could fertilize that field that you talked about. And as a teacher, you've got a tremendous opportunity to do it. As a teacher, you can begin to take those young minds, or whatever age mind there is that's in your classroom, and to get them to feel that spirit and get them to take action. But the answer to your question, in my judgment, in a democratic society, in our society, is leadership and activism. We need to take chapters from the women's movement, take chapters from the civil rights movement. We're just not active. We should be marching the streets about immigration. I mean, we should be out there. I tried to spark it in New Mexico, and I want to tell you, I'm in New Mexico, 40 miles from the Mexican border. It's difficult to get the New Mexicans excited. It's not easy, but you have to keep trying. And it's about that leadership, whether it's one person or a group. And the real issue of the capitalistic society, it's got good and it's got bad, but it's have to, in my judgment, an understanding of it is the way in which you can influence it. And I felt that being in that society, I'm still on the board of two corporations, and I can share with you that a few years ago it came out that directors on one of the best corporations in the world, and then directors who were on the worst corporation in the world, and I happen to be on both of those boards. I don't know how that happened. Colgate-Palmolive is one of the best companies in the world, and Eastman Kodak was on the other end, and we're now in bankruptcy. But the point is, I learned something from both of those companies and both of those leaders, and we're not giving up, even though we're in bankruptcy in Kodak. We plan to restructure and come out the other end of Chapter 11. But the whole point is understanding those fundamentals. If you understand something, you might be able to deal with it. But economics are a very, very important part of this country. The other part is politics. And I've spent those 35 years in those careers that you've taught, that you've heard about. I've been very active in politics. That is where you can also be active. And we don't have anybody to blame but ourselves when these folks are elected. Come on. Who should we blame? Look to your neighbor. If you didn't vote, that's even worse. So this is our society, and we're not taking advantage of it. And I want to tell you the other piece is we will lose our competitiveness if we don't make changes in America. China is on the move, there's no question. India is on the move. Brazil is on the move. If we're not innovative and creative in our dealings here in America, we're going to be second rate. We talk about the world's most powerful and richest country. That's not a given for the next 5 to 10 years. Now, who's going to change all that? What difference does it make? That's what all of us as citizens have to decide. What part of this we're going to be a part of. But don't be dispirited. I'm a firm believer in democracy. I'm a firm believer that one person, we looked at the Arab Spring. That was happened by individuals with cell phones. Overturn countries. It can happen. So I don't want you to be dispirited. I wanted you to hear those issues, to think about them as social workers, and begin to figure out what do we do about them. Creative solutions. You've got a global practice program. You're giving those students and faculty a chance to see the world. I remember when I first touched down in Nigeria, first time I'd ever been outside the United States. And I couldn't believe it when I got off of Pan Am. It was Pan Am 150. You don't even know that, right? That airline called Pan American. Pan Am 150. I step off in Lagos, and I got, with wife and these 3 little kids, 5, 3, and 2, and we stepped out, and that air hit whoosh. And we got into a taxi going to the Peace Corps director's home, and there were people all over the streets, and there were folks with things on their heads, and there was bicycles and horns. And I said, my God, where am I? It was a different culture. My skin was the same. The color was there, but I was from a different culture. I realized how American I was when I set foot in Africa. I am an American. I think like one, I talk like one, I was educated like one. And what you do when you come into the country is you've got to understand that you are a guest in that country. This is not your country. That's what I learned in Nigeria and Uganda and South Africa and every place I visited. And what you did is begin to learn the culture, learn the language, learn the traditions, be able to exchange the dialogue. And understanding is the key. And then once trust develops, we all learned this from the Peace Corps, once trust is developed, you then might be able to get some improvement and change. But it's their change, not yours. I remember Peace Corps volunteers would say, this system of teaching is awful. Well, it was the British system. We didn't understand it as Americans. So what you do is to learn it, figure out how to do it, and then figure out how you can make a difference. Anyway, I've talked too long. Any other questions?
Morning. I certainly want to thank you for your presentation this morning, and it really took me back. Certainly being a Southerner, I could identify with so much of what you've said, and being a social worker and a minister, and I know you're doing well. You're going to be ready for Sunday at the AME Church.
Thank you.
You're going to be well prepared for that. I'm an AME minister myself, so I know the fire. But I wanted to talk about HIV and AIDS, something that I'm very passionate about, and preparing to go to South Africa. I know I want to do something as a mission. You can't go there without having some impact on HIV and AIDS. It's impacted my family, impacted my circle of friends and extended family, etc. So I wanted you to give me some sense as to how I can be able to do something on my own and be able to perhaps influence the group that I'm going with. We always do something when we go to a country. We never go empty-handed. How can we best influence, with our influence as the National Association of Black Social Workers, what's the best thing that we could do?
Well, I appreciate your comments and commend you for your efforts on that issue and as you go to South Africa. I think you arm yourself with information before you go. And one of the great things about our technology today, you can get so much information on the internet very, very quickly. You need to, the first thing most people don't understand, and I give this advice often, check with the United States Embassy first. Let them know, number one, you're going to be there. If they don't know you're coming to town with your group, they need to know that. Ask if you find the economics officer or the political officer of the embassy, either one. I think the political officer would be the best. Economics officer would be next. Or if they have a special office dealing with health issues, and find out exactly what's going on from their perspective. But that's number one. That's from an American perspective. They can give you the lay of the land as they see it. And I think that would be valuable. Find out what NGOs are working there. I know Africare is there. Africare was founded some 40 years ago by my good friend C. Payne Lucas. They have workers there in South Africa dealing with HIV and AIDS. So I know Africare is there. I know that there are several other NGO foundations that are there that could probably tell you a lot about what they're doing. So I would check with the NGOs, I would check with our government, and then I would also find out what South African institutions are doing. And find out very clearly what they have been doing, their progress, their challenges, so that you can put all those pieces together and figure out where your organization can fit. And if you're there for a small bit of time, you then have to figure out this is going to be a longer journey than just, a week or two.
Okay, all right. Good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Could you speak a little bit about immigration and what you see as the battleground and areas for cooperation and conflict in immigration? Because I see this as a festering sore that has to be dealt with that I'm not sure we're prepared to deal with it.
It is a very, very complex problem. I spent some time with one of the professors at New Mexico State who's been very active in this area. We held several conferences on the issue through the International Relations Institute that you heard about that I founded at New Mexico State. But before I tell you about immigration, I really think that we've got to be active on the political scene. What the first questioner talked about was his disappointment about things in this past 50 years. We need to change people that are in office that really are not seeing the world in more progressive terms. And I just think that politics play a role here, very definitely. There are a lot of things that we need to figure out how to change. But the immigration piece, first of all, we have a very poor federal immigration approach. And we have not done a comprehensive national approach on immigration. And that's because of politics. And nothing's going to happen before November because we're wrapped up in a presidential election year. So that's unfortunate. However, but having said that, and many in this room are more expert than I am, the states found an opening that if there's no comprehensive federal law dealing with immigration, the state says, we're going to do something about it. And as Arizona was one of them that stepped up. And I've been reading as much as I could about what the Arizona law, and it is being debated, and we may get a decision on that from the Supreme Court very, very soon. But they stepped in to say if the feds are not going to do anything, we're going to do something. And they are now couching, and I read an article in the Wall Street Journal where they couched it along terms of what we're doing is assisting the federal government. Whatever's on the books, we're going to enforce it. So we pass laws so we can stop people and ask questions and so forth. And many of us believe that that could be an invasion of individual and civil liberties, the way that Arizona law is fashioned. So we've got the feds versus the states. And the Supreme Court is going to weigh in on that issue, and that issue could be a constitutional issue of the power there. But the problem is we haven't dealt with that issue. We dealt with security first. Well, I think common sense would have told you you can build all the fences you want to build. You're not going to stop people who want to seek a better life from finding a way to do it. So there are two things. One, on the Mexican side, and I know that because I'm closer to the Mexican issue of immigration, but you've got it on other borders as well. But on the Mexican border, we know that there are problems in Mexico. So obviously our relationship to Mexico would make a difference in terms of how we're doing in terms of their ability to have economic and productivity in the country of Mexico. They've got real drug and violence issues there. So they've got problems, and people are seeking better ground and seeking higher ground and seeking ways to produce for their families. So that's the reasons they're coming. And the fence won't stop it. However, we were all, including this present administration, Janet Napolitano was the governor of Arizona, and now she's head of Homeland Security. And so this administration started out just like previous administrations, that we're going to deal with security. That's where the problem is. We're going to deal with security. So we're going to build fences. We're going to hire more Border Patrol agents. And all of that makes some sense if we were looking at the problem, if all of the people coming across, or if some of them, not many, if they were terrorists, if they were criminals. But that's not the case. I think there's data which shows that these people are not terrorists. They're not criminals. They're looking for jobs. But yet, that's where we are. So we start with the security piece. We're not really getting at the problem. Now, we do have a real problem because there are many people here in this country without documentation. And we happen to call them illegal immigrants. And I think that's terrible anyway. When we use these stereotypes illegal, those of you who don't, who remember segregation, I can remember we used to see headlines in the paper about forced busing. And that was an edict after the Supreme Court decision that schools should be integrated, that busing was used as a means to take kids to schools to integrate them. So when you see a headline that says forced busing, it created emotions on both sides. Who wants to be forced to do anything? But that's the way our media portrayed it. They do the same thing when they portray it with illegal immigration. That gets the emotions. We are a country of laws. So when you say illegal, you get things stirred up. But the problem is there are people in the country without legal documentation. So why don't we call them undocumented persons and figure out what we do with that? Then they have families and kids who are Americans, and they have issues because their parents are not documented. And there was the DREAM Act, which would allow those kids to get an education. We can't get that passed through Congress. So there is a need for comprehensive immigration reform, dealing with those who need a path to citizenship, dealing with those who have kids who need education, all of those things, and then what do we do about the influx of people coming in? So comprehensive immigration is what we should be about. But that's not going to happen anytime between now and November. So I gave you my reaction to it, but it's a problem.
Let me say, it seems that we're handling the immigration issue just like we've handled the drug issue. We spend all our time in interdiction,
Right.
Rather than on education and jobs, as you say.
Exactly.
And of understanding what drives that addiction. And like Ted, I also have feelings that we're just sort of replaying our same responses over and over again. And anyone in social work knows that if you don't start with the individual and make change, it's not going to be easy to make change on a national level, especially with our politics the way they are today.
But our politics don't have to be the way they are today forever. And that's my whole message to you. It doesn't have to be that way. Now, you're one voice, but you influence a lot of people. You have students, you have friends, you have colleagues, you can belong to organizations, you can begin to effectuate change. But if we sit here as social workers or as people who are interested and do nothing, we have no one else to blame but ourselves. So my view is that, yes, get active. Share that expertise, and I know many of you are doing that. Organize and look to see who's running for office, and go to those meetings and go to those rallies and ask questions and put it out there on the record. This person believes this way, and I don't agree with them. And you find like-minded people, you can make things change. You can make changes. But, you know, I may sound naive, but I do believe it can happen. I saw it happen in the civil rights movement. I saw it happen in the women's movement. It's happening slowly with the gay issues. It's beginning to happen. When they begin to frame the issue, not on sexual orientation or on sex, but begin to frame the issue on human rights, it's gotten better traction. And it's beginning to happen. But that's when people of like minds come together and say, we're going to make this happen. We're going to effectuate change. We're human beings, and we have a right, and these rights should be protected. But if we sit back and talk to each other, you know, someone told me, if you keep doing what you always did, you'll keep getting what you always got. And definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result, something like that. Any other questions? Comments? So you're all going to get up and go organize, right? Thank you very much.
Let me just say, close today with a few very short remarks. First, and it was actually really interesting, a coincidence that Ambassador Lewis, you may not know about, the gentleman who asked you about immigration, Professor Rowland, he just retired. We had a nice party yesterday, and I do recall it now correctly because yesterday I was a little bit distracted. We had this cake for his party. And our associate dean, Tom Walsh, wrote the 3 things that social work is about on that cake. And it started with values, but then the next 2 were economics and politics. So you are right there where Dick has been preaching to all of us all these years of what it matters, organizing, being committed to social justice. So that was right on. There were so many things that you shared with us that were right on. I'm so glad you taped this because I'm going to show this to students, to colleagues, to faculty. You know, let me say also something that, and I get this, family unit, education, and jobs. Completely agree with that. But there's something there. You know, he gets a call from the Vice President Al Gore and he asks him, are you going to serve as the ambassador in South Africa? I get a call from the pizza guy and he's asking me if I'm going to pick up the pizza tomorrow. So there's something more than these 3 factors. Some of us just have a gift from God to talk to people, to make a difference, and I think your life really stands for that. It's just an unbelievable charisma and gift to work on issues. I mean, if you know, I'm more in the hope field than in the disappointment field, and so this powerful message came very much speaks to my heart. You know, think about South Africa, where South Africa was 40, 50 years ago, and where it is today. It's an unbelievable change. What happens with the world today is so much better in so many ways that we could not have imagined before. So I'm completely in that field, and I think it makes a difference what we do as individuals. It makes a difference what we do as groups and organizations, and universities have a really, really important part of it. Last night at the dinner, I so much enjoyed this, I could have stayed there forever. And he's this humble guy. He doesn't even talk about Mandela. You know, he shared a few stories with us. Ambassador Lewis, how he was meeting Mandela and was invited to his house. And I was so intrigued by those things. And we talked with him also about how do you become an ambassador? I mean, yes, there's career professionals, ambassadors, and that takes for years. And I tried this once, and as you see, I didn't go anywhere. And then there are the others. Those, I think it's 2/3, 1/3, and that 1/3 gets these calls. And then they go through what you described last night, a 2 weeks training, and they call it charming school, so that you know how to do this. He doesn't have to go to charming school. He's the charmingest guy that I've ever met. So that is really a remarkable. This is another gift that you either have, you don't necessarily. It's very hard to work on this. But I also think that, and I mentioned this last night as well, as our school is moving up the ladder, and I want to go and set the new goal to be the single digits as opposed to the double digits, and we talked about that last night. The way to move up is to associate yourself with the most distinguished people. And so I already said to Ambassador Lewis, his picture will be under the faculty. We claim him. He's going to be there. We're going to sell him. There are going to be some contract negotiations between the two of us. How are we going to do that? But that's how we're going to move up. We have to be associated with these visionary people who have that power. I mean, to think about what is possible on an individual basis when we really believe and make those connections locally, nationally, and internationally. So it has been, for me, an unbelievable experience today. I really want to thank you so much that you came, Ruth, that you made it possible. Ruth said to me a year ago, so when is it going to happen? And I'm so glad it did happen on April 26th of 2012, and I want to thank you, all of you, for being here this morning and sharing with us this moment. I think it was one of the most remarkable moments for me in these 11 years I've been at BC. So thanks again, and, oh, wait a second. I'm sure my assistant would have said, what are you doing? I have a small little present for you. It's big, I don't assume you're going to take it to wherever you're going to go. They're going to send it to you. We'll give it next to you. But thanks again.